Welcome to your personalized deep dive. You shared this YouTube video featuring Dr. Gabor Mate,
Right.
and it's because you're so interested in the impact of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned wanting to look closer at how he flips the script on how we think about illness.
Yeah.
So we'll do that.
Yeah,
You're looking for practical takeaways,
absolutely.
and we've got you covered.
You know what's so wild about Dr. Mate?
Yeah.
He doesn't see illness as just physical.
Okay.
He says that emotional, social, even spiritual well-being
Wow.
are all a part of our physical health.
So it's all connected.
Yeah, and he's observed all these patterns in people who develop chronic illnesses. And get this,
What?
he claims there are no exceptions.
No exceptions. Hold on.
Yeah.
So every single person he's studied with chronic illness fits this pattern. It's a bold statement.
That's what he's saying. It's what he calls the biopsychosocial and spiritual approach.
Okay.
And it really challenges conventional medicine.
Mm-hmm.
He even quotes the Buddha,
Okay.
who said nothing exists on its own. Basically, mind, body, and environment are all connected.
Okay, so give me an example.
Yeah, think about this. Dr. Mate talks about studies that show that kids with stressed out parents
Really?
are more likely to get asthma,
Really?
even if they live in an area with low pollution.
So it's not just the air quality.
It's not just the air.
The parents' stress actually affects their kids' lungs.
Exactly.
Wow, that's kind of blowing my mind.
But it is pretty wild.
What about adults? Does he have any examples for grown-ups?
Oh, absolutely. There's this Australian study he cites that's pretty startling. Women with breast lumps who were both emotionally isolated and stressed were 9 times more likely to develop cancer.
9 times.
9 times.
That's insane.
Yeah.
So you're saying it's not just about having a stressful job or going through a divorce.
Uh-huh.
It's the stress A&D feeling alone.
That's what the research says, yeah.
Wow.
Makes you think about the impact of something like a partner's death,
Yeah.
on the surviving partner.
Oh,
It's not just grief, their whole system is thrown off.
Right, totally.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this is all connected.
Yeah.
But sometimes when I hear this stuff, it makes me feel kind of helpless.
Oh, yeah, I get it.
What if I'm already predisposed to certain illnesses?
Yeah.
Is there anything I can do about it?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting, especially because you're interested in those everyday ways trauma can impact us.
Okay.
Dr. Mate identifies these 4 patterns. He calls them fatal beliefs
Fatal beliefs.
that are common in people who are prone to chronic illness.
Okay.
He calls them fatal beliefs, but honestly, they sound like stuff I do all the time.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued.
Yeah.
What are these fatal beliefs? Do they have anything to do with this mind-body connection?
They're totally connected, and like you said, they're surprisingly common. The first one is this automatic thing we do where we worry about everyone else's needs.
Right.
And we kind of ignore our own.
Yeah.
He even shares this heartbreaking newspaper clipping
Oh, wow.
about a woman diagnosed with breast cancer.
Oh, no.
And her first thought wasn't even about her own health,
Wow.
but how she was going to support her husband emotionally.
That is so sad, but also kind of relatable.
Right.
I've definitely put others' needs before my own.
Yeah.
Even when I was struggling myself.
Totally.
What are the other patterns?
The second one is this rigid identification with your duties and roles,
Uh-huh.
rather than your true self.
Mm.
He uses this example of a doctor's obituary.
Okay.
The guy worked himself to the bone until just days before he died
Oh, wow.
from cancer.
That's sad.
It's like we forget who we are outside of being a doctor or
Yeah.
a parent or whatever our role is.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
We get so caught up in doing
Totally.
that we lose touch with ourselves.
Exactly.
Okay, what about the other two?
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
The third one might surprise you.
Okay.
It's suppressing negative emotions,
Mhm.
particularly anger. Yeah. Dr. Mate talks about this woman whose husband said she never got in a fight with anyone in her entire life,
Wow.
but suppressing anger or any emotion can have real consequences.
You mean even just getting annoyed at someone cutting me off in traffic?
Yeah.
I always thought it was better to just let it go
Uh-huh.
and not dwell on the negative stuff.
That's what a lot of us think.
Right.
But those emotions don't just disappear.
No.
He says they can actually suppress the immune system.
So bottling it all up can make us sick.
It's like your body's trying to tell you something, but you're not listening.
Wow, this is really making me rethink how I handle my emotions.
Yeah.
What's the last pattern? The fourth fatal belief.
Okay, so the fourth one is this belief that you are responsible for how everyone else feels
Okay.
and that you can never disappoint anyone.
Oh.
Like Dr. Mate tells this crazy story of a man who ate 2 dinners every night.
What?
One with his parents,
Uh,
and then another one with his wife and kids, just so he wouldn't upset anybody.
2 dinners every night. That's insane.
Yeah.
But I can see how someone could get caught in that trap.
Yeah.
Like this constant need to please everyone and avoid conflict.
Exactly. And here's the thing.
Yeah.
Dr. Mattei says these 4 patterns,
Okay.
ignoring your own needs, over-identifying with roles, suppressing your emotions, and feeling responsible for others' happiness
Okay.
aren't actually choices.
Mhm.
He thinks they're adaptations we develop in childhood.
They're for like survival mechanisms.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Like if a kid learns that expressing anger upsets their parents,
Right.
they might suppress those feelings to keep the peace.
That's the idea.
Wow.
It's an adaptation, not a conscious choice. But as Dr. Mattei says,
Yeah.
these adaptations can have long-term consequences for our health and well-being.
So what we learn to do to survive as kids can end up making us sick as adults.
Yeah.
This is heavy stuff, but it's starting to connect for me.
Good.
So how does this tie back to the mind-body connection?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting.
Okay, I'm ready.
You see these suppressed emotions, these adaptations, they don't just go away. It's like our body keeps the score,
Okay.
even if we're not aware of it. And that's where psychoneuroimmunology comes in.
Okay, back up for a sec.
Yeah.
Psychoneuro what?
Psychoneuroimmunology.
Okay, break that down for me.
It basically shows that our thoughts, feelings, and experiences
Yeah.
can directly impact our immune system.
So like if you're stressed or holding back your emotions, it weakens your immune system.
Exactly. And then you're more susceptible to getting sick.
So your body's basically saying, no more.
Yeah.
I can't keep suppressing this.
Yeah.
That makes so much sense.
Right?
I've definitely noticed that when I'm stressed, I get sick more easily.
Yeah. So common.
Dr. Mattei's book is even called When the Body Says No.
Right.
Makes you wonder what your body is saying no to.
It really does.
What about addiction?
Oh, yeah.
I know you mentioned that was a big part of his work.
It is. And he has a really interesting take on it.
Okay.
You know, he defines addiction a lot more broadly than just substance abuse.
Okay.
He sees it as any behavior we do, despite negative consequences, to seek pleasure relief or escape.
Okay.
So like workaholism,
Right.
excessive shopping, even constantly being on social media.
Okay. Yeah.
Those could all be addictions.
So it's not just drugs or alcohol.
Right.
It's more about the underlying need driving the behavior.
Exactly.
That's a different way of looking at it.
It is.
So does he think addiction is a choice then?
Well, he actually challenges the idea that it's a choice or just a genetic disease.
Okay.
He says that addiction is not the main problem, but a solution to a deeper problem.
So like unresolved pain.
Yeah, like pain, stress, or even lack of pleasure.
So instead of judging someone for their addiction, we should try to understand what pain they're trying to numb.
Yes. It's about compassion and understanding.
I like that.
And, you know, it ties back to those fatal beliefs. Those adaptations we developed as kids,
Yeah.
they can lead us to try to cope with pain or emptiness.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
This is giving me a lot to think about.
I bet.
You know, when you were talking about that study with the women in breast cancer,
Yeah.
it reminded me of something Dr. Mattei said about childhood trauma
Uh-huh.
and its link to later life illness.
Yes.
Can you tell me more about that?
Of course. That's actually one of the most powerful parts of the video.
Yeah.
Dr. Mattei shares this statistic from a Canadian study.
Okay.
Adults who were abused as children have almost a 50% higher risk of developing cancer.
Wow, 50%. That's huge.
It's a big number.
But how can something that happened in childhood have such a big impact on our health later in life?
Well, remember those coping mechanisms?
Yeah, like suppressing emotions, people-pleasing, overworking.
Exactly. Those can be helpful at the time, but they create chronic stress in the body.
And that stress can lead to health problems.
Like cancer.
So it's like our bodies remember those early traumas,
Y-
even if our minds don't.
Yeah. And it's not just those big T traumas like abuse.
Right.
Even things like being bullied or criticized.
Yeah.
Those can also have a lasting impact.
It's like all those little cuts add up over time.
Yeah, and then they weaken our system.
This is intense.
Is.
Makes you wonder if there's any hope at all.
Yeah.
Like I'm hearing all this and thinking, well, my childhood wasn't perfect, but whose is? Am I doomed?
Well, that's a really common reaction.
Yeah.
But here's the good news. Dr. Mattei emphasizes that understanding trauma
Yeah.
is not about blaming our parents or the past.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing how these experiences shaped us
Okay.
and then finding ways to reconnect with ourselves.
So if the problem is disconnection from ourselves, then the solution is to reconnect.
That's the idea.
That sounds simple, but I imagine it's harder than it sounds.
Oh, it definitely is.
What would that even look like?
Well, it's a process.
Right.
And it looks different for everyone.
Sure.
But a big part of it is about cultivating self-awareness. Okay.
And self-compassion.
So learning to recognize those patterns and offering ourselves kindness instead of judgment.
You got it.
You keep mentioning authenticity.
Yeah.
What does that actually mean?
To be authentic is to be true to ourselves.
Okay.
To honor our needs and feelings.
Even the messy ones.
Especially the messy ones.
Okay.
It's about living in line with our values and making choices that feel right for us.
Even if they go against what we were taught or what other people think we should do.
Exactly.
So trusting your gut.
Yeah. Those instincts that tell us what's right, even if we can't explain it.
Okay, so how do we learn to trust those instincts?
Yeah. Good question.
Especially after years of ignoring them.
Right. Dr. Mattei actually gives this fascinating example of aphasiacs.
Aphasiacs.
People who have lost the ability to understand speech.
Oh, wow.
Because of brain damage.
Okay.
They're actually better at detecting lies
Really?
than people who can understand language.
That's crazy.
It is wild. So they're picking up on something deeper.
Yeah, something more intuitive.
That makes me think about all the times I've ignored my gut and regretted it.
Yeah, me too. Like, there was this one time...
Well, tell me about it. It was back when I was in college, and I was about to make this huge decision about my major.
Oh, yeah.
And, like, every cell in my body was screaming, N-O.
Wow.
But I ignored it. I thought I had to be practical, you know.
Right.
Ended up totally miserable and had to switch a year later.
Oh, no.
It's like Dr. Mattei says authenticity is a survival need.
It is.
But how do we learn to trust ourselves after years of suppressing those instincts?
That is the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a journey for sure.
Okay.
But Dr. Mattei offers some good insights in the video.
Okay, like what?
Remember that dilemma he talks about between authenticity and attachment?
Oh, yeah. How we learn to suppress our true selves to maintain those bonds with our caregivers.
Exactly. And that adaptation might have been necessary for survival back then.
Right.
But it can really block us from being authentic later.
So just because we learn these patterns as kids doesn't mean we're stuck with them forever.
Not at all. We can unlearn them and even rewire our brains.
Okay, so how do we do that? Where do we even begin?
A great starting point is awareness.
Okay.
A lot of these patterns are unconscious.
Right.
So the first step is noticing them, bringing them into our conscious awareness.
So becoming more mindful of those thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that might be coming from those old adaptations.
Yes. And there are some simple but powerful practices that can help with this.
Like what?
Well, Dr. Mattei mentions journaling.
Journaling.
Yeah. It's amazing what comes up when you just write without censoring yourself. You might be surprised by the patterns you see.
I've tried journaling before, but I always get stuck on what to write.
A good prompt is, what am I feeling right now? Don't worry about making it sound good.
Okay.
Just get those feelings down.
And what else?
Another good one is to write about a time you ignored your gut. What happened? What were the consequences? What did you learn?
I like that.
Yeah.
Getting curious about our own internal landscape.
Exactly. And mindfulness practices like meditation can be really helpful too.
Okay. I've heard that, but I've always struggled with meditation.
I get it.
My mind just won't quiet down.
You know, the goal isn't to have an empty mind,
Right.
but to be aware of the thoughts as they come up.
Okay.
Observe them without judgment.
So just notice them and let them pass.
Exactly like watching clouds drift by.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, and as you practice this, you might start to notice those gut feelings.
That I might have been ignoring before.
Exactly.
So we're training our brains to pay attention to those whispers of wisdom.
Yes. And as you start to listen to those whispers, you'll start making choices that are more aligned with your true self.
This is all making so much sense.
Good.
But even with all this talk about awareness and self-compassion,
Yeah.
it can still feel scary to face those old wounds,
Right.
especially if they're connected to bad memories.
That's where self-compassion is so important.
Okay.
When you uncover those patterns, those old hurts, be gentle with yourself. Remember, those were your ways of coping, of surviving.
Right.
They might not be serving you now, but they served a purpose.
So it's like giving our younger selves a hug.
Yes.
And saying, hey, you did the best you could with what you knew back then.
Exactly. And offer yourself that same kindness you would give a friend going through something tough.
I love that instead of beating ourselves up, we can offer ourselves compassion.
It's a whole new perspective.
It really is. So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what's the key takeaway for our listener?
I think it comes down to this. Healing is possible.
From those deep wounds.
Yes. It's a journey, not a destination.
Okay.
And it takes courage and compassion.
Hmm.
But as you reconnect with your true self, you open up a life of greater freedom, joy, and well-being.
Wow.
And remember what Dr. Mate said about people recovering from addiction or serious illness? Many say it was the best thing that ever happened to them.
Why is that?
Maybe those challenges forced them to face those fatal beliefs and reconnect with their essence.
That's such a powerful reminder that even when we're suffering, there's potential for growth.
I agree.
This deep dive has been amazing. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And to our listener, thank you for joining us on this journey.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We'll be back soon with more deep dives into similar topics.
Absolutely.
Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep connecting with your true self.